Okay, you're live.
Great. So we can get going. Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome to another International Manifesto Group webinar. I'm Radhika Desai. I'm the convener of the International Manifesto Group. It's the eve of the presidential inauguration, and of course, the start of this ceasefire in Gaza, in which we have many hopes, but of course, of whose prospects we are also extremely wary for reasons that are known to everyone. Simply the way in which this horrific genocide has been allowed to continue for 15 months and more. So, but tomorrow, the liminal period between the election and the inauguration that the United States antiquated constitution stipulates will end. It's a period that has been tumultuous, to say the least, with Biden trying to do everything he can to tie Trump's hands, whether by pardoning his own son or by rushing aid out to Ukraine or rushing the spending out the door on programs he knows are not popular with Trump. Meanwhile, Trump has been making an avalanche of threats and promises, leaving everyone guessing about what he's actually going to do, given that these threats and promises are none too coherent. So, of course, at one level, therefore, our title, which is Trump's presidency and the prospects for peace, may seem hopelessly, cluelessly optimistic. How can we talk about peace when the president taking power tomorrow has won it with the most aggressive rhetoric directed against the US's own citizens and workers, some of whom he dubs illegal aliens, and against foreign nations? Well, unfortunately, it seems that the only reason I can think of is that the opposing Democrats have so far at least proved worse. So if we talk about prospects for peace, it might be entirely relative. But there are also some other factors that may kick in. There is first and foremost, of course, the unpopularity of wars that has made Trump promise to stop at least one of them, the one in Ukraine, on his way to the White House. It may also have played some sort of role in at least pausing the one in Gaza, and we hope that the pause will turn into an end rather than the end of the pause itself. And this may, of course, have something to do with the transactional character of Trump's dealings, but who knows? Let's see what happens. There is also the existence of factions of the US capitalist class who prefer to profit from peace rather than war, particularly from peace with China. And then there are the limits to US power. And there are two possibilities here. There is the possibility that Trump might be recognizing them without admitting it. This has already led some commentators, such as the Atlanticist, globalist, Bidenite, democratic Michael Ignatius, Canada's own, to berate Trump for seeking to diminish the US world role from a world role to a regional role, confined to the Americas. The other possibility, of course, in terms of the diminution of US power, is that this diminution may yet ensure the failure of any warlike initiatives that Trump may be tempted to take, particularly by those of the ruling class who benefit from war and profit from war. When Theodore Roosevelt was president at a time when US power was rising, he was famous to use the aphorism frequently, the aphorism, speak softly and carry a big stick. In the age of declining US power, clearly, Trump has the opposite motto: speak loudly, speak much, and frantically wave your diminished stick. And I mean the diminished stick seriously, because, of course, as most of you will appreciate, the United States hasn't really, while it has reigned a lot of death and destruction around the world, it hasn't really won a single war. So militarily, it's not in the strongest position. And of course, today, in terms of sending arms to Ukraine, it finds itself unable to produce even the ammunition or the appropriate arms that it would need to produce, even though it has the most it spends the most on its military of the next many states combined. And economically, for all the tariff threats that Trump is making, the fact is that the United States accounts for a mere 15.9% of world imports. So apart from particularly vulnerable countries such as Canada and Mexico, most people, when faced with tariffs, will of course suffer a rude shock, but it will not be a shock they can recover from, particularly if they start trading with one another and, of course, with China. So, given all this, the prospects for peace, it seems, may even be heightened by the fact that while his campaign was bankrolled by the madder, more maverick sections of the corporate capitalist class, who, however, seem to be on the side of, seem to be willing to oppose the more warlike Biden, many of those who opposed him during the election campaign are now coming around to him. So Mark Zuckerberg's recent genuflections towards Trump are a prime example. In any case, I'm just speculating, and we have far better speakers here, speakers who are far better informed than me, to present their more measured assessments before us today. So we will go to them in the next minute or so. But first, a couple of very simple preliminaries. A list of co-sponsors. We are very fortunate, and I'm sure that part of the excellent attendance today is because we have a number of co-sponsors. They include Critical Theory Workshop, the International Action Center, Palestine Chronicle, and Friends of Socialist China. And I would urge you all, if you don't know about them already, to please check them out. We have our own, of course, website, the International Manifest, www.internationalmanifesto.org, where you can read our manifesto in many languages. You can sign it. You can consider volunteering and making donations. And I hope you will consider all these things. So we will go to the speakers now. I will introduce each speaker in turn. Each speaker will speak for about 10 minutes each, and then we will have time for questions and answers. We have a total of 6 speakers. Fortunately, all of them are here today. So we will take about an hour for that, and then we will have between half an hour to 45 minutes for questions and answers, and hope we will end this within the 2-hour limit that we normally try to keep to. So our first speaker, and we are very lucky to have Ramzi Baroud here. Our first speaker is particularly important given the beginning of the crisis, beginning of the ceasefire rather, in Gaza. Ramzi Baroud is an author, journalist, and he is editor of Palestine Chronicle, one of the co-sponsors that I mentioned. So Ramzi, please take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you to all of those who are participating and listening to us right now. These are, I don't know how to describe this particular moment, aside from extremely emotional, but also extremely revealing in terms of the nature of the fight that is ahead of us. I've been trying to articulate in my mind, how do we understand this moment as Palestinians, particularly as people from Gaza? And I feel that the best way to put it is that this, keeping in mind that the genocide is not of our own doing, and it would have been undone regardless of the kind of Palestinian action or reaction to it. And it was an already, kind of pre-made decision by the Netanyahu government and by the Biden administration. More importantly, actually, by the Biden administration, because it would have not been sustained or facilitated or justified or defended if it were not for the US government. Considering all of this, and that we Palestinians had no control over how Americans conduct their foreign policy, how Israel conducts itself, it is the best possible conclusion. And I don't want to be misunderstood here. I'm not saying that the killing of potentially hundreds of thousands, according to Lancet Medical Journal. We're looking here at about 6% of the Gaza population, potentially up to 10%, if not even more. That is not a good conclusion. But the fact that we had no control over that moment, the fact that we persisted, resisted, we have created a new paradigm for resistance that should be studied. That should be studied by everyone and applied differently to different environments. But we have discovered, thanks to Gaza, that we have width, we have space, we have margins to maneuver as oppressed people anywhere in the world, mainly in the global south, but even within struggles for equality and rights and liberation of various forms in the global north, we do have margins to struggle. And to prove that we have margin to struggle or margins to struggle, and to fight and to win, as Gaza has indeed won under these circumstances, a simple proof is that even before the genocide in Gaza, Gaza has been under a hermetic Israeli siege. I think this is very important for people to remember, because a lot of people, including friends and comrades of Palestine, might not fully understand the dynamics that preceded October 7, 2023. Gaza has been under an Israeli occupation since 1967. Gaza has been under a constant and relentless Israeli war starting in 2008. Gaza has been under a hermetic Israeli siege 2006, 2007. Gaza had no freedom, no rights, nothing. Gazans were malnourished before the famine started. Gazans were unarmed and isolated before the war started and before October 7th. So they did not start at a good advantage. They started, as one of the poorest places on earth, one of the most isolated, one of the most condensed in terms of population, and so forth and so on. So it started way behind, fighting not only against Israel, and again, this is important, but against the entire Western conglomerate. I know some Western countries tried to jump ship at one point. Many of them persisted, I mean, to their credits, supporting Israel and Zionism until the bitter end, even after the international community, the ICC, the ICJ designated Israel as potential entity that is carrying genocide, and issued arrest warrants for Israeli leaders and all of that. Still, they persisted until the very end. Canada is one of them, of course, the United States, Britain, among others. But that said, almost on the first or second day of the Israeli genocide in Gaza, you had 5 major world intelligence units operating from inside the so-called Gaza envelope, helping Israel gather information and conduct its war, genocidal war against the Palestinians. I think they were the US, Germany, Italy, Britain, and I think Canada is one of them. I'm not certain about that. But here you have it. Gaza is fighting against all Western major powers in all of their military equipments, in all of their intelligence. And lots of information also was revealed that Americans were on the ground. Although the American government denied that, but we have some serious investigative journalism showing that Americans were in fact on the ground, including the particular massacre in Nusayrat, where they killed 271 Palestinians, wounded 800, and destroyed an entire neighborhood. And just for the record, that's my neighborhood. That's where I lived. Everybody in it was killed or wounded to save the 4 Israelis, and the Americans were involved in it. Yet, despite all of this, Israel has failed to achieve any of its objectives. No destruction of the resistance, no ethnic cleansing of Palestinians to the Sinai Desert, no dismantling of anything, no imposing permanent security control over Gaza. None has been achieved. Now they are trying to play with words, and no, we are going to keep some buffer zones and not buffer zones. They can say whatever they want to. They achieved absolutely nothing. At the beginning of the war, I'm going to try to time myself here. At the beginning of the war, an ex-Israeli general, or an Israeli general who served at one point in the Israeli army, was in an interview with Channel 14, I believe, said, he was asked to define victory and defeat. He said, victory for the Palestinians would be a single child in Gaza City flashing the victory sign at the end of the war. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen. And indeed, they really did their best. I mean, they killed 16,000 children. They wounded a lot more. Thousands of them are still under the rubble. They did the best they could to prevent that moment. Now the entire Gaza are in the streets of Gaza flashing the victory signs. So even according to that psychological definition of the war, Palestinians have won. Moshe Viglin, a former contender for the Likud party membership, close ally with Netanyahu, turned against Netanyahu at one point, also said that what bothered him the most is that the fear factor, he said, which is interesting. He didn't say Gazans or Palestinians. He said Muslims are not afraid of us anymore. Muslims are not, and that was for him the real crisis. They needed to have that fear factor. You can't tell me that Palestinians right now, despite of everything, they are living in fear. So there are so many obstacles that have been broken, so many issues that have been sorted out, and Palestinians emerge with this new spirit of victory that is unprecedented. And when I say unprecedented, I say it from a historical point of view. I've been helping my daughter do her finalize her PhD on Palestinian history and the British Mandate. And one of the books I'm helping her translate from Arabic to English is a book by a historian named Akram Zaiter, one of our very, very early historians about 100 years ago. And he talks about the fight and the resistance, the armed resistance, but the popular resistance, the strikes in Palestine in the early 1920s, all the way until the end of the 1930s. And as I'm going through all of this text, I am searching for a moment, despite the proud history of Palestinian resilience and resistance and popular resistance, despite of all of this, I couldn't find from that moment until today, until this particular moment, few hours ago, a moment in our history in which we can actually claim an actual victory, an actual military and people's victory over Israel. The psychological impact of this are dire for Israel. And the psychological impact of this for the Palestinians is going to be generational and is going to be fundamental in changing the relationship between the Israeli occupation and Israeli apartheid and the Palestinian people, not just in Gaza, but everywhere else. This is the moment we are talking about. This is how history has been made. And again, back to the issue of margins. If Gaza has done this under with no resources, virtually no resources, and during a state of famine, who is to say that oppressed people in far more privileged, and I'm not trying to undermine the struggle of any nation. I am based in the US right now. And I know the kind of struggles and I know the socioeconomic disadvantages of many oppressed groups and many minorities and so forth. And I've traveled many parts of the world from South America to China, and I know the kind of struggles that exist in other parts of the world. But considering that the hardship faced by the Palestinian people, that is something that is really even difficult to describe by words. I think other groups are in a much more privileged situation in order for them to actually sustain a long-term fight with very specific goals and ultimately win. And we need to take advantage of this. Yes, we need to talk about the victimization of the Palestinians. Israel has to be held accountable. International law has to apply. We need an era in which we change the relationship between the application of international law and the rest of the world, especially in the global south. Yes, we do need that, but we cannot take this from the Palestinian people. We cannot steal their moment of victory and glory, not just for the Palestinians' sake, but for the sake of all of us. Because what happened in Gaza today means hope. When a small, isolated group of people win against the entire Western military conglomerate, anything is possible. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you so much, Ramzi, for that absolutely inspiring and moving speech. I think you have touched us all with those, I think, very heartfelt thoughts. And I'm sure most of us agree with you. And if we do disagree, it might just be because we just can't believe the you know, what has happened and how wonderful it is and how long can it last. But okay, let's go to the next speaker. Our next speaker is Jackie Lookman. Jackie is a Pan-Africanist, internationalist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist organizer, journalist, author, and metalhead. That's how she describes herself. And she also works with the Black Agenda Report, and she also works with a program called Lookman Nation. So Jackie, please share your thoughts with us. Are you muted, Jackie? Where are you?
Apologies, I'm trying to find her. Just a second.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. That's great.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. My apologies for the technical issues. Thank you so much for having me here on this panel. Again, my name is Jacqueline Lukman, and I am the Vice Chair of the Coordinating Committee for the Black Alliance for Peace. I am the host of Darker Than Blue on a radio show on WPFW FM here in Washington, D.C., 89.3 on Pacifica Network, and all of those other things that Dr. Desai mentioned about me. And I want to start by saying that on the eve of the anniversary of the birth of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, there's something else going on tomorrow that we're marking, and that's why we are here, and that is the inauguration of the next president of the imperialist states of America, and that is Donald Trump. Now, a lot of people are very angry and are very worried and afraid about the inauguration, about the Trump presidency generally, and particularly about the inauguration being on MLK Day. But I actually believe the convergence of dates this year for this inauguration is auspicious because it gives me the opportunity to raise the issues again that Dr. King raised in his Beyond Vietnam speech. And I want to first say that the entire title of the speech is actually Beyond Vietnam, Time to Break the Silence. That was delivered on April 4, 1967 at Riverside Baptist Church in New York City. Now, in this speech, King raised the triple evils of racism, poverty, and militarism, plaguing this country in its society and impacting the world. And what King was alluding to is what we in the Black Alliance for Peace recognize as imperialism, which is why BAP was founded on April 4, 2017, to commemorate this pivotal address and as a means for us to pick up the mantle of Dr. King and raise the consciousness of the masses in this country to the issue of imperialism that he spoke of. And we exist to carry that cross, so to speak, that he bore. So many people today believe we are facing a second inauguration of Trump, and what many people fear will be increasing fascist repression against marginalized groups and expanding war because enough people didn't vote for Kamala Harris, because too many people voted for third parties or didn't vote at all in the recent presidential election. But we in BAP understand that we have arrived at this point because the American left has not been as successful as we need to have been in advancing King's anti-imperialist mantra. See, if we had, I believe there would be no confusion about the two wings of the bourgeois kleptocracy that we live in the United States under, represented by Democrats as well as Republicans, that advance the interest of the dictatorship and finance capital over the people. Currently, there is a grave challenge facing the left in the United States. We are confused about the nature of the Democrat Party, with many believing they truly are the lesser evil of the two major political parties in this country. Many delude themselves into believing in reformism and representational politics, in which small gains in limited areas are seen as major victories for the people, but the corporate bosses lose nothing. Actually, they gain more money whenever these reforms are passed, and no power is shifted in these reforms from those in power to the people. Or in the case of representational politics, in which voting for a person from a previously underrepresented group of people in power, like women or Blacks or Indigenous or immigrants, is a signal of a potential for political progress that never actually materializes for the people who have been compelled and very often bullied to vote for these folks in the name of progress. And those folks, the representational politics folks, are always, almost always Democrats. For example, when I talk about reforms, things like defund the police, which seemed like a good idea, and some city councils domestically claimed that they did it, but not one police department was actually defunded in any way. And in this country, while the political class used the demand against the very progressive forces that advanced it to quash further demands for any change at all. And if we look at this is the way politics has operated in the arena of funding of domestic military police forces. We expand that view to how we have engaged with the military budget, which impacts the rest of the world. And we see that the idea of reform is not effective, but it is something that is very popular within a Democrat context. But we also see the positioning of a Kamala Harris as the representation of better politics for marginalized people without any consideration for her track record on war and domestic repression against working class and poor people of color, ostensibly her community. But people do not understand, and when I say people, I mean people on the left in the US, seemed not to have a strong grasp on the fact that she is not of that community. So this is a class issue that the left in the United States is also very unclear on, because the confusion about the antagonistic nature of the Democrat Party to the working class and poor masses of racialized and marginalized people in this country and around the world, and the collaboration of the Democrat Party with the Republicans and their collusion with the elements of finance capital, this confusion about the nature of the Democrats on the left, I think, was seen most sharply recently in the recent elections with the frenzied demands that supposed anti-imperialists made to everyone, but including other leftists, to vote for Kamala, despite all of her existing evil and the evil she promised to continue to do were she to be elected. Remember, she said that her goal was to ensure that the US military, which is already the most lethal, deadly military in the world, will be the most lethal fighting force in the world. I don't know how you make an already deadly fighting force more deadly, but she promised that she would. And people were saying, people meaning leftists, some leftists here in the US were saying, we have to vote for Kamala Harris despite our problems with her to save us from Trump. This is confusion. But I don't want to dismiss the genuine fear of many of a Trump presidency and all of the evil, violent, racist, psychotic promises that he has been making to do harm to people for the good of the ideal of a white nationalist Christian America coming to bear on those people. I do believe conditions for all of us, working class, poor, queer, trans, immigrant, indigenous, African descended people, I do believe our conditions will become more harsh under Trump. However, I think it is important for us anti-imperialist leftists to make clear that the rise of Trump was facilitated not because of the lack of votes for the Democrat candidate, but because of the lack of commitment to advancing clear and consistent anti-imperialist positions to US policy from both major political parties, its surrogates in the US media, academia, and other bourgeois institutions. So the challenge facing the left under a Trump administration that is incoming is first, I think, admitting that the confusion on the left about Democrat support of imperialism is what got us here. Left support of imperialist warmongering against Russia, war rhetoric, the support from the left against some war rhetoric against China, and now, as we have seen, support of the imperialist US-backed coup in Syria has obscured Dr. King's clear admonition of US militarism and the money that goes to the war machine that destroys working class, poor, peasant people around the world, instead of that money going onto the plates of the same class of people here creates the situation we're confronted with now, in which Trump is held up as up to the masses as a figure of singularly unique oppression. And some say fascism or proto-fascism or whichever term you would like to use. But had we confronted the policies from the Biden-Harris administration that have already created the same conditions that people are afraid Trump will create, I mean, Ramsey Baru just told you that the Biden-Harris administration was involved in, deeply implicated, and completely responsible for enabling this horror in Gaza. If we had confronted uniformly with the same condemnation of the war in Ukraine, the war rhetoric against China, the coup in Syria, the attempted coup or invasion in Haiti, the sanctions on Cuba, the sanctions on Venezuela, the arrest warrant just issued by Biden for President Nicolas Maduro, the sanctions against Eritrea. And do you understand what I mean? If the U.S. left had been cohesively, loudly, and consistently condemning all and every U.S. imperialist policy coming from the beating heart of imperialism, regardless of who is the spokesperson for it, I am not saying that there would not be a Trump presidency. I do believe, though, that there would be more clarity on what this moment means and who is truly responsible for it. And I believe what that means is we would be in a better position to know who to fight and who we should be fighting with. Do you understand? Because I do believe that we are faced with an anti-imperialist left then. Do you understand? Leftists who are inclined to agree with imperialist policies if they are justified by liberal or neoliberal logic of expediency, if that's what we want to call it, rather than, the scary conservative logic of brute force white supremacist domination. What we're faced is a social imperialist left in which there is a labor aristocracy where the class interests of people in the United States, where we have more in common, the working class of all walks of life have more in common with each other, regardless of our ethnic, religious, racial, or cultural differences than we do with any of the politicians of any major or minor party or any of the corporate interests. And if we understood that and were consistent in working toward that, we would also understand that our interests are more in line with people of our class around the world, more than we have allegiance with those who have a D behind their name in the political arena here. We are faced with a labor aristocracy that has sold out the interests of the working class and poor people in this country to the petty bourgeois, or rather, I'm sorry, not the petty bourgeois, the bourgeois class, the finance capitalists, lending validity and legitimacy to the dictatorship of finance capitalists among the working class in this country, which undermines the struggle for anti-imperialism and the struggle to destroy this imperialist system in this country to save the rest of the world from it, from the entire kleptocratic imperialist system, not just from one person that the system creates. Do you understand? So
if you could wrap up quickly, Jackie.
Yes.
If you could wrap up.
Yes. So in closing, I say that certainly this moment is frightening for many people, but it is not hopeless, because what we must do is stay true to clear and consistent anti-imperialist ideology and struggle along those lines for class solidarity among all groups of people, ensuring everyone's people-centered human rights against all imperialism. That is our task before us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jackie. That was really, again, a very important intervention, reminding us of the obstacles in the way of removing these imperialist governments. And one hopes that they can be overcome, but at the moment there does not seem to be very much sign. But I think with people like you battling it out, we hope this will happen sooner than later. Andrew Murray is our next speaker. Andrew is a trade union leader, and he's also a leading member of the Stop the War Coalition. Please take it away, Andrew. You've got 10 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Radhika, and thank you for the invitation to speak this afternoon. I was going to start with a reference to a very famous British sitcom called Dad's Army, about the Home Guard in the Second World War. It occurs to me that given the international nature of our audience today, this may be entirely unintelligible to some of you. But anyway, there was a character in that called Corporal Jones who was famous for running around saying, "Don't panic, don't panic." And I think that has to be where we start from today on the eve of President Trump's re-inauguration as president. Because in 2016, after his first election victory, there was a sort of pandemonium on the left in Britain, as there no doubt was elsewhere, about him arriving in the US presidency. Some of that was no doubt has been proved to be well merited in relation to his racism, his misogyny, what's acknowledged by his own close advisors from his first term as his fascistic tendencies. And I should probably say here, I am really only going to be addressing Trump's international politics today. Obviously, American comrades will have their own views, and Jackie has just expressed them clearly about the new president. But in terms of his international politics, I think there is now a more realistic evaluation than there was 8 years ago of what he represents and what our overall problem is, in that it is not the sort of sudden renegade arrival of a very unusual demagogic reality TV king president. It is the continuity of the policy of US imperialism. The last 4 years have probably been a more profound learning experience than the preceding 4 under Trump, in that the administration exiting tomorrow has been in its international politics as bellicose, aggressive and reactionary, really as any we have seen. I mean, the George W. Bush administration obviously would be a strong rival, but the Biden administration has been has been up to its neck in war throughout. It has prolonged and exacerbated the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and poured billions into sustaining it, and squashed on any possibilities of a peaceful resolution over the last nearly 3 years now. Its record in Gaza, I don't think, really needs any great elaboration here. It has, I mean, the words of it permitted a genocide or even aided and abetted seem inadequate. It has, with a very active British collusion, driven the genocide, and which it could easily have stopped at a few days' notice at any point. Its direct aggression in the Middle East against Yemen has to be added to the charge sheet, and it has also ratcheted up the position of the United States in relation to China, in that Biden was the first president, I believe. I mean, I think there are greater experts on China here than me, but who actually said the US will fight to obstruct the reintegration of Taiwan with the People's Republic, and it's not reversed in any sense the most reactionary of the foreign policies that Trump did follow in office. So really, I mean, we have learned a lot about, however one wants to describe it, liberal centrist imperialism in an age of the decay of US power. And we've also relearned a lesson about the high degree of continuity between different administrations and different parties in the USA, a continuity which is really essential to imperialism, to its functioning. And we've seen that in the history of Britain as well over the years. And now Trump has arrived. He's or is about to. He has said that he will try and bring an end to the Ukraine conflict, insofar as that's within his power, which is considerable. We'll have to see how he delivers on that, but it's certainly a different tone and a different intent to that displayed by Joe Biden. And his pressure, applying a pressure which Biden was unwilling to do, has at least created the present ceasefire in Gaza, which we hope will hold, which Ramsey's already described the situation there. And I don't know who it was. Was it you, Radhika, that talked about Trump's intensely transactional nature? And clearly he is looking to organize big deals with the Gulf states in America's interests, and the Gulf states and Israel and so on. So he is bringing a different angle to US imperialist policies. And I say that without the slightest illusion in him. In fact, if there were anyone with illusions, he's worked hard to dispel them. I've never yet thought I would have to march under the slogans of hands off Greenland or solidarity with independent Canada. But, you know, these things may now be forced upon us as an aggressive American nationalism is promoted. And it's worth, I think, just spending a second that this America firstism, which in any event is only a part of the Trump supporting coalition. It's an element of it. There's more conventional neoconservatism inside his tent as well. It cannot really be isolationism. There is not the possibility of Washington, any administration, following an isolationist policy. Of course, there can be different priorities, but American imperialism, as I think Jackie has just described very eloquently, remains the main orientation, and that is incompatible with any form of isolationism of any sort. And his policy is more America first, or America above all, and we will have to see the consequences of that. In the anti-war movement in Britain, our line has been we don't, cheer for Trump or cheer for Biden. We don't cheer for Republicans or Democrats. We wish to separate British policy from its bellicose subservience to the USA. The tight alliance between British and American imperialism, which has continued to embroil this country in a huge number of international conflicts. And that's not to minimize in any sense the responsibility for that from the decisions of British politicians themselves. But many of these are wars which functionally the British state could hardly get involved in, were it not for its strong alliance with the USA, which has been on display in the Gaza genocide as well, with British bases in Cyprus being used to help deliver American arms to the Israeli embassy, and to fly spy flights over Gaza in order to assist the Israeli armed forces. We can see that probably the person who is panicking about Trump appears to be Keir Starmer, in that he is desperate to keep Britain aligned with the USA. The British economy is flatlining. British services, social services, public services have been ruined by 14 years of Tory austerity, and yet he can only offer more of the same. He doesn't want to have to choose between allying with the US and trying to get Britain back to a more advantageous position in the European Union market, which obviously was compromised by Brexit. and so he is wriggling to avoid offending Trump and keeping the alliance going. I am, amongst other things, presently a parliamentary reporter for the Morning Star newspaper, and in that capacity, more to make trouble than to elicit information, I will admit, I asked Keir Starmer's spokesman at a press briefing what was the government's position on the president-elect's demand that His Majesty the King should be deprived of his sovereignty over Canada. Well, they haven't got an answer to that. They just squirm in embarrassment. And the answer so far seems to be Peter Mandelson will sort it out. And I think that's an improbable scenario. Veteran intriguer and imperialist as Peter Mandelson is, I think he's going to find it very hard to carry on, to align a British Labour government with the administration in the USA. Whether that's true or not, certainly I think a new field has opened up for us in the anti-war and solidarity movements here in Britain, which have displayed an impressive resilience in their mobilization in support of the Palestinian people over the last 15 months, and continues to do so in the face, as we saw yesterday, of more serious repression directed by the present government than by the last one against our demonstrations. So our focus in the anti-war movement is to end our support, automatic support for Washington and its wars, and the slightly outre nature of President Trump and his associates and his way of conducting business may create new openings for that, but we do it without any illusions or any expectation that Democrats in the USA are going to present the sort of change that we need. And we need to, draw comfort from the objective facts. I mean, Ramsey has spoken about the heroic and unbroken resistance of the Palestinian people in the face of the genocide. There is also the rise of China, which clearly is a target for the Trump administration, absolutely a focus for it, but I'm not sure whether he will be able to materially derail China's advance. And we have the mobilization of opinion. I mean, Jackie, who spoke just now from the USA, laid great emphasis rightly on anti-imperialism. It is a fact, I would assert, that in the last 20 years or so, we have now had a stronger and more developed anti-imperialist trend in the anti-war movement in British politics generally. Our capacity to fight against wars remains powerful. Our solidarity with the Palestinian people remains very, very strong. And I think these facts, as much as who is in the White House, are going to shape the future. So I'll end on that, hopefully, optimistic note.
Thanks so much, Andrew, for that very, I think, cautiously and measured, cautiously hopeful analysis, very measured analysis from Britain, which I always like to think of as Batman to the US Robin. So so let's go to our next speaker now. The next speaker is Gabriel Rockhill. Gabriel is the founding director of the Critical Theory Workshop and professor of philosophy at Villanova University in the United States. Please go ahead, Gabriel.
Thank you so much, Radhika, and thank you to all the other organizers. The comments that I have today are about fascism and the necessity of understanding it dialectically. So strap on your theoretical seatbelts. There's just going to be a little bit of methodological work to clarify what that means, because I think it helps us elucidate the current situation. The starting point for a dialectical approach is that we need to recognize that fascism isn't a thing in the world, but rather a concept developed in a particular situation to refer to an intricate set of processes of political management that appeared novel at the time. In fact, when the term fascism emerged in Italy It was not at all a coherent doctrine or a fixed ideology, but rather a rough description of a dynamic and changing set of practices. Mussolini himself insisted on this multiple times. In its early phase, fascism in Italy was actually reformist and Republican. It advocated for women's suffrage, supported some limited pro-labor reforms, feuded with the Catholic Church, and was not openly racist. All of this, of course, changed over time. A dialectical analysis of fascism accounts for these types of variations, but it is also thoroughly materialist, meaning that it sheds light on the ways in which these various practices are rooted in the socioeconomic base. This is important because fascism's specific ideological contours can vary significantly, even to the point of taking on apparently incompatible forms, because it mobilizes different religious, racial, or national characteristics in its project. It can be, for instance, white supremacist and German ultranationalist, as in the case of Nazi Germany. But it can also be animated by Jewish fundamentalism or Islamic fundamentalism in other contexts. Its consistency from a dialectical materialist point of view is to be found in its relationship to the socioeconomic base, not the ideological superstructure. Fascism is best understood as a form of capitalist, social and political management that is more heavily relied on in times of crisis as, quote, the final solution to the class struggle, as Michael Parenti said. Fascism has been used to different degrees on various populations. Far from being incompatible with liberal democracy, I've elsewhere argued that it often functions in tandem with it. Consider the case that the United States, which maintains a bourgeois liberal democracy on the home front, nonetheless supports, and this is a quote from Victor Marchetti of the CIA, every half-assed dictator, military junta, oligarchy that existed in the third world, end quote. The incoming Trump administration will not change the course of U.S. foreign policy in this regard. Having filled his administration with neoconservative war hawks, it is on course to pursue imperialist objectives in West Asia and intensify the hybrid war on China, as well as progressive states and movements around the world. This imperialist tactic is slightly different than the Democrats, who have been focused on the proxy war in the Ukraine against Russia, but the overall strategy of strengthening US-led imperialism in a moment of decline is the same. It is certainly the case that the Trump administration has worked to present itself as if it were dedicated to global peace, when in fact it is above all devoted to pursuing imperialist hybrid wars while using some different tactics than the Democrats, in part to make it look like they're doing something fundamentally different. Regarding domestic policy, the United States has historically maintained a bourgeois democracy, but there is also, at the same time, a very powerful police state that makes constant war on the most oppressed and exploited members of the working class, particularly the immigrant population and racialized groups. Victims of this police state, such as George Jackson, have described it as fascist in its repression of the working class. And the US has established, of course, the largest prison and detention system in the world, not to mention a global system of carceral black sites. In spite of some tactical disagreements, both Democrats and Republicans partake in what we might call imperial fascism around the world and police state fascism on the home front, while nonetheless maintaining a bourgeois liberal state. If we engage in a dialectical rather than a non-dialectical analysis, then we can identify these different processes of governance as part of an overall system. Liberal democracy manages the professional managerial class stratum and the upper layers of the working class, as well as acquiescent members of the domestic population. Fascism is unleashed on the non-acquiescent workers of the global South, as well as the racialized and potentially insurgent underclass on the home front. Rather than complete opposites, these modes of governance function as the good cop, liberalism, and bad cop, fascism, of capitalism. What a dialectical analysis allows us to see is that just like the notorious interrogation tactic, the good cop and the bad cop, as much as they would like us to believe that they have opposite agendas, are working together toward the same fundamental goal, namely the maintenance or expansion of capitalist social relations. Trump has been very explicit about intensifying the war on the most oppressed and exploited members of the working class, and this is the material objective behind his racism and misogyny. He seeks to escalate the war on the working class by targeting its lowest tiers in order to drive wages and living standards down for all workers. This is all packaged in an ultra-nationalist, religiously inflected ideology of scapegoating, a tactic taken directly out of the playbook of so many fascist demagogues. In a phase of imperialist decline, when it is materially obvious to most people that the United States is not as economically well off as it once was, the idea of making America great again plugs neatly into a logic of nationalist and religious rejuvenation via racist scapegoating, if it be against the racialized working class and particularly the immigrant population, or against the Chinese as the representatives of a systemic alternative to imperialism. This project has emboldened and empowered fascist organizations in the United States, like the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and the Three Percenters. It has also been dedicated to dismantling democratic rights and increasingly making the bourgeois legal state into a gangster capitalist state run by robber barons. Indeed, Trump already worked with reactionary elements of the state and fascist militias, while backed, as always, by the most reactionary forces of finance capital to try and overturn the last election. He's also on record repeating that the 2024 election was the last one. What a dialectical analysis of fascism reveals is that it is a process of socio-political management that comes in many different degrees, and our analysis needs to be fine-grained enough that it is attentive to all of the dimensions of governance. It is true that there is not, at this point, an open fascist dictatorship in the United States, which is a very good thing. Anyone who is serious about practical politics should defend liberal rights and democratic rule over and against their fascist annihilation. What the incoming Trump administration represents, then, is an ongoing intensification of imperial and police state fascism, combined with an open war on democratic rights, a rolling back of the bourgeois rule of law, and an effort to embolden parastate fascist forces. When people claim that Trump has no ideology or is just an opportunist, they often accept, at least implicitly, the psychologizing descriptions of him promoted by public relations firms, which present him as an idiosyncratic outsider rather than a gangster capitalist with a very clear agenda. His discursive provocations, which sometimes appear erratic, are so constant that people should recognize them for what they are, a successful tactic for staying in the media limelight, regardless of whether or not he acts on them. If one examines his actions and not just his words, it is crystal clear that he has never been so erratic that he decided, out of the blue, to reject imperialism or embrace socialism. Moreover, opportunism, we should remember, is a dominant ideology under capitalism, and it has never been incompatible with fascism. If we see through the psychologizing public relations hoopla about Trump's idiosyncrasies, which endeavor to singularize him as a subject to such an extent that he's severed from the system that produced him, we can appreciate the fact that his ideology is actually on constant display and is absolutely consistent. He's pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist, anti-communist, racist, misogynist, ultra-nationalist demagogue. We are therefore at the dawn of what certainly looks like a very dark chapter of US politics, both at home and abroad. As it continues in fits and starts its imperial decline, its ruling class is desperately looking for strategies to rejuvenate its super profits of yesteryear and beat back the perennial threat of socialism posed most strongly by China. Capitalism in crisis is what is driving the growth of fascism in the United States and across the capitalist world. It is imperative to recognize it for what it is in order to take all of the necessary countermeasures. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gabriel, for that very important reminder that what Trump is doing brazenly and openly is what the Democrats have been doing hypocritically all this while, and therefore there's really no reason to expect any great change between the one and the other in substance. That's very important. Our next speaker will be Keith Bennett. Keith Bennett is one of the co-editors of the Friends of Socialist China website, and he spent basically most of his life studying China, on which he's a great expert or specialist. I think Keith would insist on specialist. Okay, Keith, please go ahead.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction, Radhika. And yes, not expert. I happen to hold the view that there are no non-Chinese people in the world who are experts on China. We can just strive to understand better. Anyway, thank you. Meeting on the theme of Trump's presidency and the prospects for peace in 2025, it is natural that we look especially at the war raging in Ukraine for nearly 3 years and at the situation in West Asia as a tentative ceasefire emerges after more than 15 months of unrelenting genocide in Gaza. With so many thousands of lives being lost, is it self-indulgence or overreach to also turn our attention to the Asia-Pacific region? But today, no bilateral relationship in the world is more important, more strategic, and more fraught with dangers of global conflict than that between the United States and China. Faced with the peaceful rise of China, a rise unparalleled in human history, it has essentially become a consensus among the otherwise contending wings of the US ruling class that the preservation of US global hegemony necessitates taking China as Washington's principal adversary, from Greenland to the South Pacific and from semiconductors to social media. As with Cold War I and the Soviet Union, the US seeks to reverse China's progress and at best bring it to heel through a combination of a debilitating arms race, ideological subversion, and economic and technological strangulation. A key difference is that not only has China drawn lessons from the collapse of the Soviet Union, whereas the USA and the USSR were essentially economically insulated from one another, China has spent the best part of half a century integrating itself into the global economy, creating such facts on the ground in the process as ever more complex global supply chains, and with China accounting for some 11% of US foreign trade. So what then does Trump's return mean for China-US relations? First, Trump revels in his role as disruptor-in-chief, so the first thing we should expect is the unexpected. Certainly, if he carries through on even a fraction of his recent threats regarding tariffs, not only will China face an economic challenge, the entire global economy, in a parlous enough state as it is, and not least the US economy itself, will be plunged into crisis. But overall, there seems little reason to anticipate a fundamental change of direction. When Biden assumed the presidency, many had hopes for a return to a more rational and constructive China policy in Washington. This did not materialize. Far from reversing Trump's anti-China measures, the Biden administration ratcheted them up substantially, especially in terms of trying to restrict China's access to computer chips and other advanced technology. And as Andrew just pointed out, Biden was the first US president, at least since the United States and China formally established diplomatic relations under Jimmy Carter, to state that the United States would fight in defense of Taiwan. So to the extent that there was change under Biden, it came essentially in two areas. His administration largely eschewed the openly racist rhetoric of Trump, Kung flu, Chinese virus, etc., which undoubtedly made life somewhat more tolerable, at least, for many Chinese and other Asian and Pacific Islander Americans. And whereas Trump was an equal opportunities bully when it came to insulting and threatening allies and adversaries alike, Biden's team worked hard, and with a considerable degree of success, to reinforce cohesion in NATO, get the EU on side, and reinvigorate and reinforce old alliances, such as those with Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, all with a view to confronting China, along with Russia, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, and other states in Washington's crosshairs. So, even if Trump ups the ante with China, it will not break the essential continuum established by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton with their 2011 pivot to Asia. The team of rivals that Trump has been assembling for his administration certainly lacks the intellectual brilliance of that forged by Abraham Lincoln, but it is not monolithic on China. Trump himself cares little for liberal democracy, and on that level, at least, his antipathy to China probably lacks the deep ideological foundation that the US Democratic Party has come to increasingly embody. His motivation is more straightforwardly and overtly venal and mercenary. He will fight ruthlessly but may be prepared to cut a deal if he feels the terms are good, or perhaps as importantly, if he can present it as a win. We need to think only of his apparent volte-face on TikTok, and just this afternoon he said that he intends to issue an executive order in that regard, it is doubtless related to its ability to help feed his social media obsession. The same cannot be said for his proposed Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who clearly will not be satisfied with anything less than the overthrow of the Communist Party of China. A similar orientation can be seen on the part of a number of Trump's other nominees, including those to be given trade, defense, and national security portfolios. But this in turn is different from the stand of Trump's current bestie, although for how long is anyone's guess, Elon Musk, whose Shanghai factory accounts for half of Tesla's global production. Another area where this pattern can be expected to assert itself is in diplomacy, and hence on the international balance of forces. As mentioned, while the Biden administration strove with considerable success to unite the imperialist camp, in the case of Trump, from Angela Merkel to Justin Trudeau, if there's one thing he seems to enjoy more than insulting America's adversaries, it's insulting America's allies. The Asia-Pacific region is where key issues still unresolved from the 1940s continue to fester, and where the interests of nuclear powers, principally the United States, China, Russia, and the DPRK, collide and at times coincide. How will Trump in his second presidential term react to tensions in the Taiwan Straits or the South China Sea? On the Korean Peninsula, will he once again resort to threats of unleashing fire and fury, as he did in the early stage of his first presidential term, or will he seek a further meeting with Kim Jong-un? No other serving US president ever dared to meet the top leader of the DPRK, something that Trump did 3 times, even accepting Kim Jong-un's invitation to step into the DPRK itself. Even after negotiations broke down, the 2 men are understood to have continued private correspondence. On the campaign trail, Trump spoke of his relationship with Kim Jong-un and of his desire to get back to dialogue. But the DPRK is not the same country as in Trump's first term. Its nuclear weapons program, along with its delivery mechanisms, is considerably further advanced, and its international position apparently strengthened by its new strategic alliance with Russia. On the other hand, the DPRK appears, at least for now, to have tired of the volatile, unpredictable, and unreliable diplomacy of the USA, which had stymied and frustrated some 3 decades of DPRK efforts to normalize relations. Regarding China, as Inauguration Day tomorrow looms, Trump appears to be playing the same game of personalized diplomacy. An invitation to President Xi Jinping will see the unprecedented attendance of Vice President Han Cheng at tomorrow's ceremony. Commenting on his phone call with President Xi on Friday, Trump said it was a very good one for both China and the USA. It is my expectation that we will solve many problems together and starting immediately. President Xi and I will do everything possible to make the world more peaceful and safe. According to China's Xinhua news agency, Trump thanked Xi for his congratulations, saying that he cherishes his great relationship with Xi, hopes to continue to maintain dialogue and communication, and looks forward to meeting Xi at an early date. The United States and China are the most important countries in the world today, and they should maintain long-lasting friendship and work together to safeguard global peace. Of course, Trump never seems to have a phone call with another world leader that he doesn't seem to think has gone great. And just the day before, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson slammed comments by Marco Rubio as unwarranted attacks after the senator in his confirmation hearing called China the most dangerous near-peer adversary the US has ever faced. But significantly, there has been no repetition of Trump's December 2016 pre-inauguration phone call with the secessionist leader of China's Taiwan province, although there will be quite senior Taiwan representation from both the ruling DPP and the opposition Kuomintang at tomorrow's inauguration. And last night, describing it as an exclusive, the Wall Street Journal reported that Trump had told his advisors that he wants to visit China within his first 100 days in office. Perhaps significantly, the Xinhua news agency was quick to report on this. How these relationships play out will have a major bearing on the future of the world in the coming period. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keith. That was absolutely so informative. Really, really thought-provoking. Thanks very much. All the small things that may be important and different is what you focused on, and that's really great. We can now go to Sarah Flounders, our last speaker. And please note that after Sarah has spoken, we will have time for questions and answers. So please collect them. If please also, in the meantime, if you want to ask a question, locate the raise hand function, which will be somewhere along that bottom set of buttons. And it may be hidden behind one of them. So please look for it because you'll be able to put your questions yourselves. Okay, let me just introduce Sarah briefly. Sarah Flounders is a long-standing political activist and author based in New York. She's contributing editor of the Workers' World newspaper and a leader of the United National Anti-War Coalition, the International Action Center, and the Sanctions Kill campaign. So, Sarah, please go ahead.
Hello, I am trying to turn on my video.
We can hear you now, Sarah. Oh, you're trying to turn on your video. I wonder what happened.
I don't know. It says I'm blocked by the host. So if somebody there can turn me on, that would be appreciated.
Let me see. Sarah. Okay. I'm going to make you co-host and see if that makes a difference. Can you turn? Oh, I know what it is. Oh, why can't I? I've made you co-host. And it is not showing that here that I am blocking you. Is that what it says to you? Yeah, there you are. Perfect.
Okay.
Excellent.
Here I am.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
And thank you to the International Manifesto for this opportunity and this incredible panel. It's what we need in the period ahead. Greater collaboration, exchange, and determined solidarity. First, I want to salute the ceasefire deal today. After 15 months of US-funded vicious destruction by the Israeli occupation forces of every block and neighborhood in Gaza, including every hospital, school, torching tent cities. Today is a ceasefire, the beginning of a prisoner exchange agreement that leaves the Palestinian resistance undefeated. The heroic people of Palestine have forced the US-backed Zionist regime to officially deal with Hamas and the resistance organizations who have remained intact. In resistance and guerrilla warfare, to survive as an organization is to live to fight another day. We salute the enormous political, organizational, and military accomplishment paid at a high price. Israel and US imperialism are hated globally on a scale not seen before. Tens of thousands of Zionist settlers have left Israel, where thousands of businesses have closed. Zionism has failed to achieve its aims, and the resistance has survived. This latest ceasefire, no matter how short-term or long-term, reflects that Israel and its imperialist backers are not invincible. The complete inability of Israel in more than 15 months of bombing, backed by the US and the other imperialist powers, to defeat the Palestinian liberation struggle, and the revolutionary unity of the axis of resistance confirms the limits of US power. This ceasefire confirms that resistance, unity, and political morale are stronger than the most brutal, advanced, high-tech weapons. Now, Let's talk about the Trump presidency and the prospects for peace in 2025. You can't put the two together. There is no prospect of peace. Trump is not offering peace. The MAGA slogan, "Make America Great Again," is a war cry. MAGA is also an out-of-date wish list. It confirms just how out of touch the U.S. ruling class establishment is with the world today. U.S. hegemony is gone, but U.S. imperialists in their arrogance can't see the facts on the ground. Slogans or threats won't change the downward spiral of U.S. imperialism. Wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, total support of the Zionists in Palestine, NATO war in Ukraine, sanctions on 40 countries, a third of the world population, threats on Korea and Iran, efforts to encircle China. They're all massively destructive, fabulously expensive. It includes the use of mercenary armies, proxy forces, thousands of US-funded NGOs. But 2 decades of nonstop wars have failed to turn the US global position around. US strategy continues. It's to create chaos, and to disrupt development everywhere. Now, this is not the world situation that Trump faced when he was elected president in 2016, a mere 8 years ago. The world is changing fast. Whether Republican or Democratic Party are in office, the US empire today has nothing to offer the world except more threats, sanctions, and wars. And that is no longer sufficient to maintain its dominance. The effort to threaten China by dismembering Russia totally failed, and it actually reinforced the trade and security integration of Russia and China. Now, just today, Russia and Iran signed a strategic partnership accord involving defense and economic exchange at a whole new level. There's rapidly developing alliances of countries of the global south, and it can no longer be ignored. While Trump and his whole crew of right-wing racist planners announced their plans to take everything backward, the whole world is consciously moving forward. Now, we don't know what aggressive plans Trump will announce today, tomorrow, and in the days ahead. The Trump announcement that the U.S. must take over Greenland, make Canada the 51st state, and retake the Panama Canal is directed at attempting total control of this hemisphere. It's an assertion, and it's part of a wild attempt to isolate China, to control the shipping lanes of the Arctic and the Panama Canal, the global navigation routes, and it will arouse a firestorm in this hemisphere. There's now a whole series of trade alliances, new forms of exchange, and a confident new spirit that confront the tired old MAGA slogan. China's Belt and Road Initiative, involving 150 countries, it's the most ambitious infrastructure project ever conceived. Among the world's emerging economies, new payments and trade mechanisms to bypass US-dominated structures and those horrific sanctions on a third of the world are developing. More than 30 countries have applied to join BRICS. There's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Trump and the new administration is focusing on China, on China, on China. Why? China is the world's largest exporter of goods, the largest producer of real goods, and this is a threat to U.S. economic dominance. The scale of China's exports of $1.6 trillion to the countries of the global south and the BRICS countries is now 4 times that of China's annual exports to the U.S. So what China offers is not just a powerful economy and new development plans. Because China's socialist base isn't driven to maximize profit for its private shareholders in every possible transaction, the government is able to introduce a wholly different approach to development. This gives rise to a very different kind of international relations. Genuine collaboration is possible, and this is a radical break from centuries of horrific imperialist looting in Africa, Asia, throughout the global South. Globally, there is a steady determination to develop alternatives. And because US imperialism is incapable of any project that's not immediately profitable for its corporate investors, it's only able to issue streams of threats, warnings, and false information against Belt and Road development projects. But even if Trump isn't first and foremost a capitalist, a racist demagogue, the whole vast apparatus of 800 military bases globally, the huge, highly profitable military industry, the invasive national security apparatus, that's who operates and sets policy, regardless of who's in office, Republican or Democrat, Biden or Trump. The interlocking military-industrial complex of banking, military industries, huge lobbying corporations, that determines US policy. Now, the Trump administration is unapologetic. Trump is a billionaire capitalist and proud of it. He can only survive, though, by providing new sources of profit to the corporate elite. And that means looting Social Security, turning it over to Wall Street, or drastic cuts in social services, every conceivable service, or investing US funds in cryptocurrencies. It's all economic growth and profit based on wild speculation. There's endless schemes to loot the working class in the United States today, but how to divide the working class to accomplish it, that is what Trump is proposing. Blame migrants, not the corporate rulers. Promise mass deportations. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, intends to expel some 13 million undocumented workers, rounding them up, putting them in camps. These migrant workers keep essential industries, construction, agriculture, hospitality, home care, running. And it's a plan to cause massive misery and disrupt society. Blame trans people. Divide, attack the most vulnerable. But the problem remains that imperialism can create horrific ruin, millions of refugees, but it cannot consolidate its control. US imperialism is totally overextended. So in closing, in the period ahead, we need to escalate our solidarity with Palestine, with Syria, where there's such a setback, with Lebanon, with Iran, and with China, and with the sanctioned countries of Africa and the Americas. There's a new day, and the old order is collapsing. US imperialism is in decline and decay. There are numerous emerging alliances. There's commodity trading platforms along with cross-border payment instruments. There's new political and economic structures. This cooperation gives hope for the future. The people of the whole world are demanding an end to all the restrictive, prohibitive measures. With renewed determination, let's strengthen our solidarity. I'll end with a salute to the heroic people of Venezuela, a salute to the elections in Venezuela, a salute to the new Federation of the Sahel in Africa, and to Palestine and continued resistance. Cooperation and development among all the people of the world is the only way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. It was such a quietly grim picture you paint. I was reminded of Yeats's poem, whose first line goes, turning and turning in a widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. And I would only disagree with that last because it's not mere anarchy. It is what you say. It is the joint resistance of people that will take the opportunity provided by the collapsing order of capitalism and imperialism and build something new. So thank you so much. That was a great way of closing. And I think you reminded us at the end, as Ramsey reminded us at the beginning, that the key lies in the struggles of the people, and the key lies in knowing that they can win no matter how powerful capitalism and imperialism can seem at any moment. Thank you so much. I see that our speakers have been extremely inspiring, and I already have 5 hands up. And I propose to take those 5 that are already up now. Please be brief in your questions. Then I will give all the speakers an opportunity to respond, and then we'll see if there are any more hands that have gone up. So I'll begin with, and please try to keep your interventions to no more than 1.5 minutes, maximum 2 minutes. Millie Esther, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hi there, hopefully you can hear me. My question was for Dr. Rockhill. I was wondering if he noticed in China, and also glad to see you are back in one piece, if you noticed in China a popular sentiment for Taiwan, mainland China unification amongst the everyday Chinese people.
Great, thank you. That's an excellent example of brevity. Thank you, Millie. The next question will come from Norma Harrison. Please go ahead, Norma. Oh, yes, 1 second. There you go. I'm asking you to unmute.
Okay.
Great.
Trump is our greatest teacher. He has made organization the behavior of today. It's happening all over, building strength in opposition to the horror that the U.S. Imperium has created. What has been put forward here by many of the people is too much respect for Trump. None of the apparitions applied to him are applicable. It's all about Trump. He's not capitalist. He's not racist. He's none of those. He is a Trump aggrandizer. That's all that it's about. Not to say that all those other things don't attach to him. People are absolutely correct to name them. The directives that he has put out are to keep his name. You know, I will be as racist as I have to be. I will be as anti-immigrant as I have to be. I will make myself forward in all areas so that people will keep talking about me as though I make a difference. And of course, he makes a difference, but the American Imperium has made a difference now for several hundred years, as we know. Yeah.
If you can ask your question, please.
I'm sorry. I just have these comments.
Okay, no, that's great. And they're interesting comments, and I'm sure some of the speakers will respond to you. So thank you very much. I have David next. Please go ahead, David. Oh, sorry, hang on. I keep forgetting. There you go. Please unmute yourself. Yes.
I'm okay?
Yes, absolutely. We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. I'm a senior citizen. I have a disability. I've been abused and neglected all my life, denied employment. I had been doing low-level general labor jobs all my life. And I've been ripped off and scammed of most of my savings. And I have an older brother. He takes care of me. He supports me. If my brother ever die in this capitalist system, it doesn't work. That's what I got to say,
Very important. Thank you so much, David. We have next Dan Yassin. One second, Dan. There. You should be able to unmute now. Yes, it looks like you are.
Thank you, Radhika, and all the co-hosts and all the groups for a wonderful panel. Speakers were great. My question is regarding, with all the rhetoric that Trump during the campaign he was more interested in stopping the war in Ukraine, like he claimed he's going to do it in 24 hours. But what he did for this ceasefire, as we understand now, listening to the Qatari Prime Minister, that the ceasefire deal was the one that was put together way back in December of 2023. So the Biden administration, of course, is to be blamed for not, being complicit. And it was Israel and Netanyahu that were not doing it. So I would like to have opinion of our panelists about what changed, and just Steve Witkoff's Trump sending him to Oman and then sending him to Tel Aviv. How did Trump decide to do so? He wanted to have this ceasefire day before he inaugurates. So what is behind that? Where is he headed with that?
Great. Thank you so much. And then finally, we have Peggy Dobbins in this round. Peggy, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you. I was very pleased to hear you, Radhika, raise the question of this is a time for us to confront the contradictions among, and I won't list all of them, but there are many there for us to address, and I would like to have you or Gabriel or any of the other panelists respond to how do we seize those opportunities, suggestions.
Great, thank you very much. Quanta, I'm going to leave you there now. I think there might be one or two other hands up, so we'll take a small second round. But having done that, maybe we should just go to all the speakers, perhaps in the same order as they spoke. So beginning with Ramzi, if you would perhaps respond, Ramzi, to any and all of the questions you wish to respond to. Go ahead, Ramzi.
Okay. I'm not on video. I'm trying to turn my video on. I know you can hear me, but most likely you can't see me.
Let me see what is going on. I have no idea.
But
Oh,
I think it's okay. I'm fine.
no. Let me see if that works. Can you? Yes, we can
yes,
see you now.
think.
We just
Perfect.
there you are. Yeah.
Perfect. Just a couple of quick comments about two of the questions. One about, I think Dan Yassin asked a question like Trump, why now, and the envoys and Oman and Tel Aviv. I think it has something to do. Before I say what it has something to do with, let me just, as I've been listening to everyone, I also kind of went through some quick articles and commentaries and analysis about the ceasefire and what happened. And sadly, even among Arab commentators at Al Jazeera and elsewhere, they are still kind of stuck with this idea that this is an outcome of everything that happened or did not happen in Tel Aviv and Washington, as if Gaza had no role to play in any of this, which is just astoundingly wrong. I mean, if Palestinians did not resist in Gaza, this whole thing would have been sorted out a long time ago. Israeli military vehicles would have been just roaming around Gaza, building settlements, resorts for soldiers, and Jared Kushner would have been in somewhere in northern Gaza as he wanted to build resorts because, as he said, the real estate is very good in that area. I mean, so this has everything to do with the Palestinians. So let's not please deny them agency when they need that the most right now. But as far as Trump's position on this, historically, American presidents do not like to inherit each other's wars. This is why we have these chapters in history where this is George W. Bush's war, the other Bush's war, Nixon's war, Kennedy's war, Obama's war, and so forth and so on. So naturally, Trump did not want to inherit a war that has particularly been a completely lost cause that cost Americans tens of billions of dollars, did not achieve any of their strategic or geopolitical goals whatsoever, created a major distraction when the Americans are trying, or the American empire is shifting its focus to the South China Sea and the Pacific region and all of that. And just for them, it's not a top priority. Again, this is a heartless businessman who likes to get, some value for his money. And how the US government under Biden has given Israel tens of billions of dollars to get the job done. And the job, of course, entailed massacring or exterminating the Palestinian people, and still couldn't get the job done. And Trump would have been foolish to want to continue on that. It doesn't make him a good man or a proper leader by any definitions. It's just based on American kind of calculations, and this is just not a war to be pursued, and this is why he shifted his position against the war and so on. Trump invests in what is known as maximum pressure. We all know that term, but it's a business term. It's about sanctions, starving people, breaking their economic backs. He's going to do that in Iran. He's going to try to do that in China, although he's going to miserably fail, because we know that China is capable of dealing and absorbing any economic pressure coming from the Americans. And it's the American economy that is actually vulnerable, not the Chinese economy, and so forth and so on. So this is what we are going to see from Trump: more sanctions, more pressure on enemy countries in the Middle East and beyond, as opposed to pursuing a war that is not going anywhere. The opportunities, very, very quickly about the opportunities. I was really happy to see Gabrielle speaking earlier, because it was Gabrielle that recommended the book Western Marxism. To me, I was watching him on YouTube a few months ago, and he recommended this very important book by Italian scholar Lozordo. And he was talking about how the opportunities of the Eastern Marxists, if you will, have been missed by many in the West. All the achievements of Vietnam, all the resistance, victories in various parts of Africa and Asia and South America have either been missed, completely neglected, relegated, or actually processed to be a negative thing, as far as the left and progressives in the West have done throughout the years. And I say this is a new opportunity. What happened in Gaza, what's happened in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Yemen, it's a new opportunity to show that, no, we can actually be victorious if you appreciate the significance, the historic significance of this moment, and build on it. And these are the opportunities. Unfortunately, although some countries have really stepped up, especially in Africa and South America, have stepped up, other countries that should have taken the opportunities or used this opportunity to build a global order that is situated in a more equitable way, including the global South, have missed that opportunity, maybe because they did not have faith in the Palestinians or in the Middle East as a foundation for a new global change. But I feel like the opportunity is still there. We just really need to understand it fully and to build on it for the future.
Okay, great, Ramzi. Thank you so much. We will now go to Jackie. Jackie, you should be able to unmute yourself. I've just changed the settings here. So please go ahead and respond to anything you like. By the way, including speakers are free to respond to each other as well. Ramzi, sorry, I hope you didn't miss out on that, since I didn't say that. But please feel free to come back in if you want.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope you all can hear me well. Thank you, Ramzi, for your comments that you just made about Lusordo's book, Western Marxism, because of course that led me to immediately think of Walter Rodney's decolonial Marxism, and the focus on the application of Marxist theory on the continent, in the Caribbean, in the global South. And this is the point I think I was getting to in speaking about the solidarity we need to have. Our solidarity should be based upon who are the targets of US imperialism. I like to try to simplify things as much as possible for people, quite honestly, who are not leftists, who don't understand the language, who know nothing about Lenin, who don't know anything about Marx, or who might be afraid of socialism. So I present to them the contradiction. The main contradiction we are faced right now is not Donald Trump. The contradiction is imperialism. What is the answer to imperialism? It is some form of collectivism. You can call it Marxism, you can call it socialism, you call it whatever you want, but we have information, guidance, footprints, blueprints that help us get there. And we must seize upon that information, these sources, from people who have been historically the targets of US imperialism, of Western imperialism, and learn from them how they have applied these various aspects of the concept of Marxism, Leninism, to their historical and material conditions. It is not that there is one framework that is a one-size-fits-all box, and everyone has to do the same thing to reach the Marxist utopia. That is the narrative that is presented usually by liberals, by petty bourgeois, by bourgeois liberals in this country as an argument against socialist systems. But it is what is best for you and your people in your historical and material context to ensure and guarantee people-centered human rights in the destruction of imperialist domination, as we are seeing in the AES, as we are seeing, and that is an incredibly important development in the history of the continent of Africa, considering how the colonization of Africa came about, which was another manifestation of imperialism. So for me, to answer the question specifically of the primary contradiction and how we achieve solidarity, the primary contradiction, as a troublesome a figure as Trump may be, he is not the primary contradiction. The primary contradiction is imperialism and the undergirding dictatorship of finance capitalism. And the answer to that is solidarity with the people who are the targets of that system and its manifestations, and how we rebuild our societies once, as we are struggling against that system. It is these Marxist narratives or examples of struggle, successful struggle against previous iterations of imperialism that we get from these texts from Lusordo and Rodney and Sankara that are being emulated right now as we speak. We are not only living history, we are also making a new people's history. And I hope that is exciting to many people, as it is very nerve-wracking to be at this moment now when we can't see the future, but we know that we must take the next step to get there. So I hope that I have been able to convey that attitude of hope, and I really appreciate being on this panel with all of you. Sadly, I have to go. And I appreciate everything that everyone has contributed, because you have certainly renewed my hope for this moment as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I think that's a very important reminder, and hope in the future when the International Manifesto Group tries to revive these other histories, that you will come and help us. Next will be Andrew Murray. Andrew, would you like to respond to any of the questions posed?
Well, I think both Ramsey and Jackie have given very comprehensive answers. I'd only like to, well, first I'd just like to add, if we're recommending books by Dominic Lusordo, could I also recommend his book Class Struggle, which was published a few years ago, which the basic thesis is the connection between class struggle and struggles for national independence against imperialism, if I can summarize a very rich book in a sentence. And I think that is well worth comrades' time to read as well. The only point I want to take up that hasn't already been covered is how we was posed as take advantage of the opportunities. And I think one additional point that needs to develop is to connect the global policy of imperialism and its drive to war with the domestic conditions that working class people are facing. I'm speaking mainly about Britain, but I don't believe it's very different in other countries around the world. That, I mean, for example, we've had a very powerful movement of solidarity with the Palestinian people over the last 15 months. Our movement against the war in Ukraine has been far weaker. There's various reasons for that, but we have struggled to get the same degree of a hearing. But we have made progress, and that is by connecting the crisis in our own economy and the social services and the austerity program that really both governments of both parties have maintained, with the vast increases in arms spending being canvassed, and in Britain's case, the sending of £3 billion a year to the Ukraine. Keir Starmer signed an agreement in Kiev just this last week, a 100-year agreement of alliance between Britain and Ukraine, which, without allowing for projected inflation over the next century, would be at least £300 billion transfers in military aid alone. Now, Donald Trump, one of his demands has been an increase to 5% of GDP on military spending throughout the NATO alliance. That would be, in Britain, that would be more than doubling the share of GDP devoted to military spending. And I believe it's probably an even greater proportionate increase in almost every other NATO power, apart from the USA itself and Greece, which already spent a lot of money, but that's against another NATO ally, Turkey, that it's mainly concerned with. So this, even trying to get towards these targets, which Trump will try and bully the NATO powers, including Britain, towards, will involve a vast transfer of resources from meeting every conceivable form of human need. It will involve a squeeze on wages, the degradation of the public realm beyond the miseries it's already in. And this is the future of imperialism. Miserable, impoverished countries with workers oppressed and facing stagnant or declining living standards, surrounded by vast arsenals of missiles and tanks and fighter jets and whatever, gearing up for war. Now, that basic argument can be popularized and translated in a number of different ways according to circumstances. But I think connecting the imperialist world policy, its drive to war against China, its push against Russia, its wars in the Middle East, with the attack on the living standards and well-being of workers in our developed capitalist countries, first wave capitalist countries, is an important part of strengthening the movement and taking advantage of the opportunities.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I will now ask Gabriel to respond to any questions he would like.
Thanks, Radhika. I have the same issue with my video. I don't know if there's a way of resolving it, or I can just share comments. It's fine.
Hang on. You should be able to turn it on. I have allowed everyone to turn on their videos if they want to. So you.
Yeah, it just says you can't start your video because the host has stopped it, but it's fine. You can look into it. Otherwise, I'm happy to just share my comments without the camera.
Yeah, because earlier Jackie could turn hers on. So I don't understand. I have renamed them.
I'm not sure why, but I will proceed to not bore people then.
Okay,
just a few
continue, but I'm trying to solve this, yeah.
Okay, no worries. A few quick comments. One is that regarding the China's the one China policy in general, I do think that one of the really remarkable things that you see on the global stage is the discrepancy between capitalist forms of governance and socialist forms of governance, and that China has long-term strategic thinking at the center of its entire project, and the capitalist West does not. It is anarchic.
Sorry, who was that?
Were you able to mute that, Radhika? Yeah.
I
Sorry,
guess
that was
so.
not.
I didn't. I think maybe Carlos or Linda did. But
Okay.
okay, here. Can you start it now? Can you start your video now?
I have the same issue,
Oh, crumb.
but it's fine.
Okay.
So I was just saying that the capitalist governance tends to be very short term in its orientation, very anarchic and rather erratic compared to the long-term strategic thinking of socialist governments like China. And the goal of peaceful reunification and the one China policy is something that is really at the center, obviously, of their entire political orientation. I think will happen in due time. Concerning the fact that Trump is a self-aggrandizer and a narcissist, I think that what I was encouraging people to do is to disconnect from the psychologizing tendencies that are constantly rolled out in the mass media and via the PR firms that run Trump's image, and to recognize that racism and misogyny are longstanding ideological forms that serve a principal purpose within an economic system of capitalism, and that is to increase the war on the most exploited and most oppressed members of the working class. And so these aren't accidental features. They aren't just because he's a horrible person and has bad morality. It's part of the overall war on the most oppressed and exploited members of the working class. The last thing that I would say, because I think it's an important point that someone my fan base apparently keeps sharing some of their musical choices with us.
You are the only one who is about you and me are the only ones who are not muted.
Yeah, it's definitely not my music, definitely not coming from mine. Anyway, I'll wrap this up quickly by saying that the contradictions that are apparent on the global stage are very important, and we have to take full advantage of them in order to move forward. Meaning, organizers and educators and cultural producers have an incredible opportunity because it's clear that the facade of the U.S. empire is cracking, and people are seeing through it in ways that they haven't, I think, in a very long time. And we need to take full advantage of that and advance on all fronts in order to dismantle the kind of fragmenting empire and get people on path towards the real project, and that is building a socioeconomic system that serves the interests of people and saving the planet rather than that of simply maximizing profits. So I'll leave it at that and turn it back to you, Radhika. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Gabriel, and very sorry for all the malfunctions, but that was a great response. Thank you. I'll ask Keith next. Please go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, thanks very much. We've had some brilliant replies already from the other speakers. I just wanted to refer to the very first question that was raised, whether it was directed specifically at Gabriel, but it was whether one had noticed popular sentiment for the unification of Taiwan and the mainland among everyday Chinese people. I just wanted to make a couple of comments about that. First of all, of course, there's like 1.4 billion everyday Chinese people. So as a periodic visitor, it's not necessarily easy to take a public opinion poll, but there's certain things that we can look at. One of them is sentiment on social media. And of course, social media in China is incredibly lively, incredibly diverse. Well over 1 billion people are on Chinese social media. and it's a much more it's in many ways a much more diverse and free place for discussion than social media in the West is increasingly becoming. And what one can say if one looks at social media is that the sentiment for reunification and a stridency, for want of a better word, to come immediately to mind in that is that actually, if anything, the Chinese government has to be a restraining influence on public opinion in China in terms of the degree of urgency and with which this goal would be pursued. I'd make I think a relevant comparison, because obviously there is a clear comparison anyway between the issues of Taiwan and Hong Kong, as other speakers have alluded to. But in the 1980s, when because the lease on the new territories in Hong Kong was going to expire in 1997, and 1997 was indeed the year when Hong Kong finally returned properly to China. But from the 1980s, the process of negotiations began between Britain and China regarding the Hong Kong handover. Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister at the time that those negotiations were initiated. And her opening gambit, as she was flushed up from her success in the Malvinas War, her opening gambit was to go to Deng Xiaoping and suggest that the lease be renewed and British colonial rule in Hong Kong should continue. And that was, dismissed out of hand by Deng Xiaoping. There are various amusing anecdotes about how it was received, which there aren't time to go into now. But one very important thing that Deng Xiaoping said was that if China agreed to extend the lease over Hong Kong beyond 1997, then we would, he said, be no better than the Qing dynasty. The Chinese people would not tolerate it, and we would have no alternative other than to step down from office. And I think that was an accurate reflection by Deng Xiaoping of the question of reunification as it related to Hong Kong. And I don't think that there's any reason to suspect that it doesn't apply at least equally, if not more so, to the question of Taiwan. I think it's very important to note that people-to-people links between the mainland and Taiwan, whatever the state of the political relationship, people-to-people links between the mainland and Taiwan continue to thrive. Hundreds of thousands of Taiwan people, young people in particular, live, work, study, own businesses, run businesses, work in businesses on the mainland. And I remember about a year and a bit ago being in Fujian province, and which faces Taiwan across the straits, and people there saying to me that the people on the other side of the Taiwan Straits, they're our family members. We speak the same dialect. We like the same kind of regional food dishes, and so on. And I think that's that's a very commonplace sentiment. And finally, I think it was yesterday's Financial Times. It's interesting that they should have opened up on TikTok and Taiwan when the US thing is at its present state. But there was a big feature in the Financial Times saying that TikTok was considered very dangerous in Taiwan because it was influencing young people in Taiwan to take a more favorable view of the mainland. So I'd just like to offer those points and also endorse what all the other speakers have said. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Keith. And Sarah, please go ahead if you would like to respond.
Well, thank you, Radhika, and thank you again to International Manifesto. And there's all kinds of points I could respond to here, but I want to, just in closing, I guess at the end of this session, is to say, expect the unexpected, that US plans will not go according to how Trump expects. And I think this we know. Now, a great deal of his plan is all about tariffs. And it was shocking to me to see that even Canada said yesterday they will match US tariff for tariff. If tariffs come on them, they will do it from peanut butter to grains to every possible, and they've already drawn up a plan. That's a shock. So, and by the way, Mexico has said the same thing, along, of course, with China. So the idea that the US can, by diktat, just impose tariffs on the world, and that there'll be no response, there will be an immediate response from every country where the tariffs are imposed. Now, the tariffs are an attack on working people right here, because the raise in prices is felt every supermarket, every shopping list right here. It's a damage to the economy here, but it does immediately benefit the corporate billionaires, because the prices that they pass on, the price raise of the tariffs, but it means that the corporate owners can raise every other price to match that. And that's a big boondoggle for the corporate owners, and it really will be felt here in extremely painful ways. In the same way, by the way, that the military budget is just passed on here by a constant looting of the social programs here. And we can see this in the lowering even of life expectancy and infant mortality, especially in the US. Now, on the ceasefire, I just wanted to say one word about, and this is truly speculation on my part, but I do think that it was in Trump felt it was in his interest that it be before his administration came in. It gives room for a second round, another round, and a blaming of Biden and so on. But if that's possible, because as we can see, Israel failed on every level, and that's not likely to turn around. So I think we should really, at this point, salute and know that there will be new attempts, but it's a big accomplishment that the resistance accomplished this much when they were told nothing less than their complete destruction would be acceptable, and that didn't happen. In terms of what Trump can expect in this new administration, I think what we can expect is that the US economy and every capitalist country in the world, and this is for the past 400 years, goes through cycles, goes through repressions and depressions every 7 to 10 years. And this happens inevitably. It's a very feature and characteristic of capitalist economies. And this will happen. There will be an economic collapse, and felt more strongly here because the way in which the US economy is walled off, and more likely that China on 100 ways, as they did in 2008, can ride it out. And as they did during the COVID downturn, it really went to the benefit of China, the Chinese economy, and it was able to really be enormous aid to the whole world at a very time of collapse in the capitalist world. I just wanted to comment on the idea that of Ukraine being around in 100 years. It's so typical of, I think, a British arrogance. They can more easily picture the end of the world than the end of their system, the end of their empire, and will Ukraine survive a year or even a month at this point? I think these are real questions. It's not a question of 100 years. There was someone on the chat, Michael Macadeo, who put on many chats attacking Venezuela over Guyana. I think this is another example of US disinformation, a whole US campaign. They have done everything from looting the entire Venezuelan economy, its treasury, its gold, its sanctions, and done everything they can to envenom relations with the surrounding countries. So in Guyana, yeah, they want to sign a deal with Guyana that will exclude and cut into Venezuela's access to oil. And Venezuela proposed a collaborative relation with Guyana and has proposed arbitration and negotiations for this. And it's the US and the oil corporations that are against it. So it's another example where solidarity is important, and we shouldn't allow within our ranks the constant disinformation and use of US propaganda, which is incessant. A final note on TikTok, which I do think is so interesting. There's just tens of thousands of people, myself included, who are signing on for Red Note, which is directly coming from the Chinese government. It's also a Chinese-owned app. So it does show a kind of, here in the US, even among young people who you think aren't political, their anger at the cutting of TikTok, their interest in what's happening in China, and they're going to find much more politics on Red Note than they ever found on TikTok. So it's an example of where US thinks they can do one thing and it can have the opposite effect. So I do say expect the unexpected, expect the people of the world to increasingly respond together in ways that are cohesive, and expect a continuing erratic US attitude. So our hanging together and explaining issues is a real contribution that I think we can make. So that's it.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you very much for reminding us of all the contradictions and the fact that the US is losing control, which is an altogether good thing, but it can also have lots of proximate bad effects. But I just want to say that, to apologize to Quanta and Jeffrey, we're already at nearly 11, an hour and 40 minutes. No, sorry, 2 hours and 20 minutes past our time. Thank you, Jeffrey. So I will not, I was going to allow you to ask questions and then have only ask those speakers who wanted to respond, but I think even the time for that is not there. So I hope you will join us another time and engage as you have. And again, apologies for that. Thanks to everyone for coming and staying on here. Most of you have, despite the fact that we've run well over time. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks to all the co-sponsors who helped us to publicize this meeting. And please watch out for new webinars that are coming up in the near future. We are going to have one very soon on the Venezuelan elections, I think, and many others are planned. So please come and join us. With that, I will say goodbye and good night. Good night from me here in India, anyway. Bye-bye. I'm just going to save various things so that we don't lose them, but otherwise feel free to leave if you want to, or yeah. Okay, great. And